Hey guys, welcome back. So, I've been wondering what to do for my 100th Killing Floor 2 video. I wanted it to be something special. I considered maybe doing something like me trying to win a map on Hell on Earth difficulty, but other than the fact I'm a bit shit, probably never managed that, I thought, even if I managed that, I don't think it'd be good enough. Killing Floor 2 is the main part of my channel and it's the main thing my subscribers come here to watch. The reason the series has got to where it is now is because of the map makers. So I've decided that the best thing and most useful thing to do is talk about the do's and don'ts of Killing Floor 2 map making. After all, I've done over 70 map reviews, and I've played a lot more maps than that. I've seen both the best and the worst that the community has to offer. So this video will be me talking about what steps to take when thinking about map making, how you should design them, and what you should put in them. This isn't a tutorial on the SDK, I don't know how to use that. But I do know what makes a good map, and what things you should avoid from having experienced them firsthand as a player. If you're an aspiring map maker, or you've already made maps before, maybe there will be something for you guys that will help you improve your map making skills. So as this video is you having to listen to me, I've taken out the music and I've put the sound down lower than usual for what you're going to be seeing in the background. It'll be mainly something for you to watch, but it's also something for you to reference what I'm talking about, as you'll see the different maps I'm showing in the background. Most of this video is my opinions on map making. I'm sure there'll be some of you who may disagree with some of the things I have to say, but that's okay. Feel free to discuss these sorts of things in the comments below, as I'm happy to talk about it. This discussion may also bring up some interesting points that may benefit the viewers and generate some interesting ideas. So, let's get started. So what features make a good map? Well, first of all, what kind of map is it? Is it an apocalyptic map, or something new and different? I've fought Zeds in everything from a city getting nuked, to the Krabby Patty in SpongeBob's hometown. You should put a lot of thought into what you want to make. I know it sounds like a bit of an obvious step, but it's far too common where I see a map that's been made where someone thought of something and went, I'm going to do something like this, here we go, let's just make it. For example, don't just think apocalypse and just start building a ruined city, think, wait, hang on, where is it? Maybe is it a real life location? Maybe it's down at the docks with Zeds leaping out of the water, or maybe somewhere fictional. Don't hesitate to look around for inspiration. Maybe there's something from a few different maps you've already played that you liked and can mix together. Or maybe look around similar areas in Google Maps when it comes to realistic locations. This should give you a good idea of how you can put areas like ruined towns and cities together. Thinking about how big your map is actually something you should start to do. Because if you just start building without this idea in mind, when do you stop building your map? Is it a huge 10-player map you're going to do, or maybe something intended for, I don't know, 2 to 4 people? This is important because it affects how many Z spawns and human spawns you put on the map, how many items will be available for picking up, as well as how large the map itself will be. Like, where are the edges going to be? This is important when you think about what routes players will be taking as they move around your map. Map scale affects more than you realise. Some people will make a huge map, they'll forget how much detail goes into each section. It's all very well you made a big room, but is it empty? Did you make the room big because you wanted just a big room? Or did you make it that big because that's how big these rooms are in real life? Some people also make that one map that they absolutely love. It becomes their main focus and something they keep going back to. There's nothing wrong with this, and if it's a popular map, it's something the community will like seeing updated. Maybe there are bits you would like to add on, like extra rooms, extra sections. But don't forget, there's a reason people like your map the way it is, and there's nothing wrong with having multiple versions of your map. This could be anything from small and large versions, as well as day and night versions of the same map. But only make a big map if you can fill it properly. Now, making remake maps. Maybe there's a map in another game you really wanted added to Killing Floor. These types of maps will always receive the highest level of criticism though, so be careful. Players will expect you to be as exact as possible, so make sure you do your research into your chosen map. Get a lot of screenshots, and if you can't port the textures, try and find something that is exact as possible. Another important thing to think about is whether or not your map will actually work with Killing Floor. The map you want to remake may be from a different type of game and therefore may not be suitable. So what do I mean by that? Maybe your map is very linear, where the objective from that game could just be getting from one point to another, and this may not transfer well over to Killing Floor, because Killing Floor involves surviving by running around and trying to hold down different areas by welding yourself in, or just staying in an open area. Have a think about it. Maybe copying a map directly isn't your best choice, but it would be better to create the map with a similar theme to your chosen game. For example, a Mario map wouldn't work as it's a platformer. Maybe a map with textures and objects from a Mario game would be interesting. Another example of a good direct copy would be Dust from the game Counter-Strike. This is a map that someone actually remade for Killing Floor 1. Now, Counter-Strike involves moving around and eliminating the enemy team while surviving. It doesn't have any linear maps, and you're expected to move around to all sorts of different parts of the map. These sorts of maps make good remakes to the style of game Killing Floor is, as it matches the style of movement players will make while they play the game and fight the Zeds. Now, realistic map design. Often when people have an idea for a map, they just go ahead and make it. Does that seem perfectly normal to you? Well, maybe. Map design actually involves a lot of thinking before you even really get to it. So let's make sure you're doing what's needed. Let's say you're making a typical ruined city map, and you want to add in, say, a library as one of the buildings that players can go in. Now, picture a library in your head. Have you got all the detail you needed to make the library? I'm sure you thought of all things like bookshelves, but did you think of things like the receptionist's desk, a quiet reading area, an archive room full of old books, the staff room? Maybe you did, but these are realistic parts of an area that can often be forgotten and completely left out when the idea of library comes to mind. Making map areas for video games, part of it involves a lot of research and actually going to the areas you're going to make, or similar ones, to acquire things like textures and area layout. It might seem obvious or maybe odd to some, but if you're making a town or a city, have a look at the layout of areas on Google Maps. Look at the buildings and roads for ideas. If you want to get the most exact textures possible, sometimes this may involve actually taking photos of the actual walls or ground or all sorts of things that you're going to need for your map. However, don't go overboard. At the end of the day, the limiting factor is you're making a map for a video game. For example, if my house was somewhere you could go in your map, you'd instantly get crammed by the Zeds and die, as I live in a small house. Unless you were a berserker, then you'd probably have a great time. When making a realistic map, remember there are areas people shouldn't go, as you need to make space to play the game. As an example, think of Burning Paris. This has loads of tiny buildings like shops. You can't go in these, but remember, there are larger buildings you can go in. You're not supposed to go in the shops because they're just too small to realistically play in and fight Zeds. Now, don't be afraid to limit where players can go. Limiting players could be anything from having cars blocking off roads to locked doors in a building. Here is another example. Let's say you're designing a school and you want to add a kitchen area where food would be served. This room would be full of tables and chairs. It's common for map makers to design similar rooms and then have them quite empty. This makes the map look a bit bland and it doesn't look as realistic. It could be better than that. The way you need to think about it is like this. To make the room realistic, you need to have a proper amount of furniture, but you don't want players to get stuck as they need to move around. If you're going to do an apocalyptic setting, it would make sense that maybe loads of tables and chairs are being stacked against certain doors as people were trying to survive here before the Zeds got in. What this means is you now have a good reason for why there's space in the room to play in, as the furniture has been moved to the sides of the room to block off doors. Maybe not all the furniture, but this is just an example. Now, players have space to fight. It also gives a reason to block off areas of the school. So when you're making a map, you don't have to put in every single room of a building into it. It makes sense that players be blocked by these kinds of furniture and can't move around into these doors. This can also generate further ideas, such as adding in corpses and blood into the room. After all, what do you think happened when the Zeds broke in? One thing to consider, maybe there's a reason why it's so close quarters in some rooms. Maybe you can design rooms like this to make players purposefully be at a disadvantage against the melee-focused Zeds. As the map designer, it's up to you to be creative about this. Not every room should be the best place for players to be. As for room sizes, make sure there's room for people to get around, but it is really odd seeing rooms with 20-foot high ceilings. Think about how big the rooms are supposed to be that you're making. How big do you really want them, and how big are these sorts of rooms in real life? When it comes to player movement, maps that loop back on themselves are often the most fun to play. A good example of this is Outposts. There's only one dead end on the map, and that's the one where the metal detectors are that is used as a spawn point. Dead ends aren't something you should avoid, just put them where they make sense. Zeds can get in through the windows and doors, maybe even have a ceiling spawn for crawlers and clots to get in via the vents. Making maps loop back on each other can involve a bit of extra thinking depending on what you're making. For example, you've made a back alley down the side of a building, and you aren't sure what to do with it. Can you add a back door to a building next to it so players can find a way out? Could you extend the alleyway to get to another part of the map? Maybe add some scaffolding so players can get onto the rooftop instead so it's no longer a dead end. Not all loops need to be two-way. If your city has a sewer, maybe add a sewer access point at the end of the alleyway. That way players can drop down into another part of the map as an escape point. If none of these make sense, maybe considering removing the alleyway, or maybe block it off for player access with things like a large bin or rubbish bags and boxes, and instead make it a spawn for Zeds to get in and drop down into the map. And if you're making an outdoor map, don't forget to add detail into the out of bounds areas. If it's a city, don't forget to make the rest of the city visible, or at least a reasonable amount of it. Again, Burning Paris is a good example of this. It makes it seem like the actual map you're in is a lot bigger than it really is. and it also makes it seem more realistic rather than looking at the edge of the map and there just being nothing. Now, using believable textures. Again, this might seem obvious, but odd textures being used is something I see a lot. For example, there was a map I reviewed not so long ago that had a texture that was a concrete slab. Now, concrete slabs are something that would be used for the flooring in that kind of area, but the size of the slabs in this area were several meters across. Concrete slabs aren't really that big, so make sure your textures are the right size as well as the right type. The other common one I see is using plain textures everywhere. Not everything is made of concrete. Don't forget to use textures like brickwork. As for graffiti, make sure you use them reasonably. Depending on the setting, if it's just a regular city map, you wouldn't see it on the front of a shop, but you might see it if there was an apocalypse. You aren't limited with your textures, your map can have ones of your own. If you don't think what you have fits quite right, then don't put it there, just try and find something that works if you want your map to be the most realistic it can be. I've also seen some maps that have a portrait painting on the wall, and they've replaced the face of the person in the portrait with their own face. You see these kinds of original textures used in city maps when it comes to posters. Seeing Easter eggs like this can make maps more interesting. Using textures showing material damage is very important for certain map designs, especially in Apocalypse. Everything from a road that's clearly been driven on a lot, maybe with potholes and skid marks, to rust on cars. Google is a useful source for these kinds of ideas. Some maps often look far too clean for how they are intended to be. Also, make sure the texture you use can't be clearly identified in sections. What I mean by this is that the texture needs to be able to wrap round on itself. That way you don't notice tiles and tiles and tiles of the same texture used after each other. It is quite common for me to see sections of a wall where you can identify where the texture ended and then began again by a clear line. Now, level of detail. I can't stress how important clutter is to maps. Far too often I see maps that look really tidy, unless that was the intention, which it most often always isn't. Clutter is basically random things you would find in an area in a messy state. This is things like bits of rubbish lying on a street to documents and coffee mugs strewn around on the floor of an office. Think about it like this. Zeds have just arrived. They aren't going to keep the area tidy. I personally like the look of areas that appear to have been abandoned as quickly as possible, as if people have just fled the area the second the Zeds arrived. Something I mentioned at the beginning of the video when it came to scale relates to the level of map detail. Often the largest maps have the least detail in them, which is unfortunate. Every map should have the same amount of detail per, let's say for argument's sake, every 10 meters. What I mean by this is maps are supposed to be realistic areas and should have realistic amounts of detail in them. A large open field isn't an excuse for a lack of detail. What about clumps of leaves, an abandoned vehicle, rabbit holes, areas of high grass, or maybe a dead deer mauled by Zeds? The options are literally endless. Realistic details in buildings like locked doors can make areas like a corridor more interesting. There are lots of maps I've played where it looks like the designer was struggling for ideas when it came to wall detail. Often posters or painting is something people resort to. If you're making an office and you've made a few office rooms, it can be a positive addition to add locked doors as detail for the other office rooms. Players have already seen what the office rooms look like inside, and locked doors make you feel like the building is much larger and that there will be a lot more to see. If you've ever played Office from Killing Floor 1, you'll know what I mean. You can only get into about half of the office rooms in that building, the other doors are just closed. Sometimes the detail of the map is up to the player's imagination. Maybe your out of map areas aren't very detailed and you can't think of any way to improve it. Maybe make the weather foggy so that the poorly detailed buildings are gloomy shapes in the distance, partially obscured by the fog. This leads me on to weather. This can be a very interesting addition to maps. I find it best if the weather fits the style of the map or wasn't just added for the sake of it. It can certainly help set the mood. Remember that weather doesn't always have to be visual. For example, an indoor map at a castle or something could have howling wind outside, and you can limit the visual effects to the few windows on the level. Weather isn't just for realism. Perhaps there is heavy snow or heavy rain that limits the player's vision so the Zeds are harder to find. You don't just have to make it nighttime to get players to be surprised by Zeds. Think about the time of year as well. If it's autumn, then the trees will be a different colour. There'll be leaves all over the place. Perhaps if you want wind in your map but can't think of how to show this other than the sound of wind, you can also have leaves blowing around. As I said before, make sure that the weather matches the map. If it's raining, make sure the floor looks wet and that there are puddles. The same with snow. Make sure it's piled up a bit here and there. As for day and night, that's up to you. Daytime maps are easy to do. Nighttime maps are often too bright though when made by players. Ideally this should be compensated by the lighting, such as street lights for players to see. If you've ever seen a city in power blackout in real life, you know exactly how dark it can get in a city area with no lighting. Do be careful though, as if it's too dark, players may not enjoy the map as much. Simple things like an overcast sky should make a map darker, and a full moon in the night sky will make the darkness a little brighter. These things can give you a reason to have the map at the level of brightness you want, just make sure it all makes sense. Now, destructible lighting. After fighting in one place for so long, the lighting will get damaged and fighting there becomes more dangerous due to the darkness. How much this affects the players is up to you. It can be quite common for players to find their favourite area of the map just to keep fighting in over and over each wave. Usually lighting can get very low and you end up having to use your torch more often, but sometimes you can still see quite well. You may choose to change this and make areas pitch black if all the lighting is destroyed. This would certainly make it more realistic. Bear in mind some players have their preferences over how dark they want their maps to end up in. As for preferences, scripted events and object interactions, this is something I like a lot to see in maps. This is basically where your imagination can truly run wild. These are features of a map that can be changed by the player. Perhaps you have a lift that can go up and down between all floors on the map. Make it slow so there's a chance that Zeds will be waiting for you when you reach the floor you want. Other events could be a locked door that players must find all the hidden buttons on the map to open. This could just be for an Easter egg, or maybe there's a hidden weapon. Or maybe you could have special locked doors that just access more of the map. Perhaps this just affects the route. Maybe you have an underground car park that has a dead end. If you find the button for it, you can open a security door that leads outside to the rest of the map and help you have more room to escape. And if you're feeling cruel, maybe the door is just really slow to open. There's a chance that once you find the button and press it, it may take a while before you can actually get out through the door. And who knows, maybe that door will shut itself between waves as well, just to be a bit more cruel. I've seen scripted events like valves to activate fire sprinklers that douse the fires in other areas of the map where destructible cars would have hindered your movement, as well as things like a moving train in the centre of the map. You can move the train backwards and forwards, give you quicker access to different parts of the map that would have otherwise taken you a lot longer to get to. Then of course, there are simple collectibles you can hide around. There are always players who love to around finding these, whether it's the typical Dosh medallion or something special you want to put in. Maybe you can add an event that something happens when you collect them all. Overall, these are much more complex things to add to a map. They can really make them quite unique and special. Now, something that everyone wants, how to make your map popular. Well, it's all about publicity. The more people who know about your map, the better. These days people will throw their map together up on the workshop and then that'll be the end of it. It's not the best way though. The workshop is only one step. Don't forget, Tripwire Interactive has official forums when it comes to map making. Here you can talk to other map makers for advice, ask questions and all sorts. There is also a beta section and a final map release section. It's very important that you make it clear if your map is in beta or if it's finished. This will affect the level of criticism and the amount of help you'll get with it. It's best to let your map out to people in a beta state and let other players play it for feedback. Whether you decide to release it officially or to a lot of friends you have is up to you. There's typically something a map maker can miss, even if it's something as Z pathing, like maybe they just get stuck on a particular point of the map or there's certain parts that they won't walk on for whatever kind of weird reason. Once people have tried your map in beta, then I think it's time to put your map on the workshop. And also of course, then post it in the final map section of the forums. The workshop is a very different place to post your map than the forums. For example, over time your map might get ignored if it has too many problems with it in the past. Make sure it's good to go before you actually put it up there, in my opinion. And of course, make sure you get your map out to as many people as possible. This includes people such as myself and others who do map making reviews. That way more people will get to see it. It's not just about the map reviewers though. Maybe there's someone who plays a lot of Killing Floor 2 on their channel or Twitch. Viewers who like the look of the map will ask which one it is, and that way more people will go looking for it and find your post on the workshop or the forums to try it out for themselves. Getting your map out to these types of reviewers and players is basically free advertising that you need to make use of. There are also map competitions you can submit your maps for, such as the Grindhouse map competition that ran a while ago. This will get a lot of people to try playing your map. And who knows, maybe your map will get enough recognition it will become an official map. You'll never know until you try. Well, that's all for now for episode 100 of Killing Floor 2, so thanks to Tripwire Interactive for making the game, you guys are awesome. But a big thank you to all those map makers out there. Not just for making maps for me to review, but also making those maps for everyone out there to play and enjoy. I can't thank you guys enough for how you've helped the Killing Floor community. I hope everyone has found this video interesting, that you've all gotten something out of it. I'm going to keep doing more map reviews as long as the map makers continue making good maps. So thanks for watching. If you want to see more map reviews and maybe more multiplayer games in the future, then please subscribe and hit that like button. I always do my best to keep up with the comments, and seeing someone say they like my channel, or even if it's just the one video, that puts a smile on my face. It's great to see there are people out there who like the content I enjoy making. That's all for now. See you guys next time.